Have you ever been judged by your job title, your age, or what you were wearing? A moment where someone looked right through you and decided you had nothing to offer? In a quiet diner, a powerful CEO, drowning in a $1 billion problem, makes that exact mistake. Frustrated and arrogant, he mocks the young waitress serving his coffee, sneering, "If you're so smart, then translate this," and shoves a complex legal document into her hands. But what he thinks is a moment of dismissal is about to become the most humbling and transformative lesson of his life. He's about to learn that brilliance isn't always found in a boardroom. Before we see what happens next, tell us in the comments. What is the biggest mistake people make when they underestimate someone? The warm hum of the Grove Cafe was a familiar melody, a constant comfort in a world that often felt anything but. It smelled of hash browns, brewed coffee, and the faint sweetness of pancake syrup that clung to the air like a fond memory. Vinyl booths, worn smooth by countless conversations, lined the walls, and the gentle, soulful sounds of a Motown tune drifted from an aging jukebox in the corner. This was Alara Vance's world. A predictable, orderly space she navigated with a quiet grace, her faded gray apron a uniform of her current reality. Into this gentle hum, a storm arrived. He didn't walk in so much as occupy the space, his presence a sharp, discordant note in the cafe's soft symphony. Julian Croft, his name synonymous with the glass and steel towers that pierced the city skyline, looked utterly out of place. His navy suit was a slash of severe color against the cafe's warm wood tones, and the frustration radiating from him was a palpable force. He wasn't a man accustomed to the cozy chaos of a diner. He was a shark, and this felt like a fishbowl. With a sharp exhale, he slammed a thick stack of papers onto the counter with the flat of his palm, the sound like a gavel in the quiet room. Alara had been refilling a sugar dispenser. She didn't flinch, merely looked up. She'd noticed him minutes earlier, hunched over the documents, his jaw tight, a red pen scrawling angry notes in the margins. She had approached with a glass of water, a simple gesture of kindness. "Looks like you're wrestling with a bear," she had said, her smile gentle. He hadn't even looked up. "It's a contract. You wouldn't understand." The dismissal was as swift as it was absolute. Now, faced with his explosive frustration, she felt a stillness settle over her. "If you're so damn smart," he sneered, the words slicing through the air, "then translate this." The request, no, the challenge, hung in the space between them. Forks paused midair. Even the jukebox at the far end seemed to hold its breath, the soulful voice of the singer caught in a silent plea. Alara Vance, 19 years old, her expression unreadable, simply looked down at the thick legal stack in front of her. Merger documents, the kind that had already defeated 3 of the most expensive attorneys in the city. And yet, for a moment, in her worn apron and scuffed sneakers, she stood taller than the man in the crisp navy suit. She blinked once. Her voice, when it came, was calm, even, "Is this the entire contract?" Julian Croft raised a brow, a flicker of surprise cutting through his anger. "Does it matter?" "It does," she said, her gaze steady. "Context changes things." He didn't answer. He just gestured with a dismissive shrug, a king giving a child permission to play with a trinket. He watched, expecting a fumbling attempt, a moment of confused defeat he could use to validate his own boiling frustration. Instead, he saw something else entirely. Alara's fingers moved with a quiet, focused grace as she flipped through the pages. Her dark eyes, framed by an intensity that seemed far beyond her years, scanned the dense text at a surprising pace. The cafe around her slowly returned to its gentle rhythm, the clatter of silverware, the low murmur of conversations. But for Alara, the world had gone silent. She had stepped into a quieter dimension, a place where only logic and language lived, a place she knew intimately. Julian leaned forward slightly, his own breathing seeming to slow as he watched her. Minutes stretched into an eternity. He was about to make another sarcastic remark when she finally spoke, her finger pointing to a paragraph deep within the document. "You've got a clause here," she said, her tone purely analytical, that lets the other company back out if your stock drops more than 7% after the merger is announced. Julian blinked. That wasn't exactly a secret. That's not incorrect. Alara nodded, her eyes still scanning the page. But it's vague on what constitutes market disruption. That gives them wiggle room. Too much wiggle room. She flipped another few pages, her finger landing on a new section. Also, the escrow amount. They're asking for $400 million locked down with no release triggers tied to performance. She finally looked up, her gaze meeting his directly. That's not a partnership, Mr. Croft. That's leverage. The air left Julian's lungs. He leaned forward, the expensive fabric of his suit crinkling. The anger in his eyes was replaced by a sharp, piercing curiosity. How do you know all this? Alara didn't look away. I used to read things like this in class. Emory, pre-law, before my mom got sick, before I had to start flipping pancakes to pay the rent. Something inside Julian shifted. It was a subtle, tectonic movement beneath the surface of his carefully constructed world. He had built his tech empire from a tiny code shop into a billion-dollar behemoth. His boardroom presence was legendary. He was always 3 moves ahead. But in this moment, he felt utterly blindsided. His mouth opened, then closed. He studied her face, seeing not just the sharp intellect in her tone, but the profound steadiness in her hands. She wasn't bluffing. He said, almost to himself, I'm surprised you stayed in town. A small, wry smile touched her lips. I'm surprised you came into this diner, thinking you wouldn't find anyone smarter than you. The line landed like a clean jab. Sharp, unexpected, and perfectly aimed. The Formica table between them was suddenly more than just a table. It was a battlefield where he had just been soundly outmaneuvered. For the first time in months, Julian Croft wasn't thinking about stock prices or shareholder votes. He was thinking about the young woman across from him, who had just exposed 2 critical weaknesses in a contract drafted by corporate elites. What's your name? He asked, his voice softer now. Alara. Alara Vance. He nodded slowly, the name settling in his mind. You ever think about doing more with all that sharp thinking? She wiped her hands on her apron, the gesture bringing her back to her reality. I did, she said, a world of meaning in those 2 words. But sometimes, life doesn't care what you plan. Silence stretched between them, thick with unspoken truths. Then, she pushed the contract back toward him. You should fix Clause 7C and add phase-based release triggers on the escrow, tied to deliverables. Otherwise, they'll squeeze you when you're most vulnerable. Julian stared at her, his jaw tight. You're serious, he murmured. Alara gave a half-smile, the first genuine one he'd seen. I was serious before you insulted me. I'm just being generous now. He didn't reply right away. His eyes flicked down to the contract, then to her notepad, where she had jotted a few concise, surgical notes. For the first time in weeks, the words on the page didn't seem like fog. They were starting to make sense. And it wasn't because of him. He asked, somewhat awkwardly, Can I buy you coffee? Alara glanced at his own untouched, cold mug. You already did. And with that, she turned, walking back toward the kitchen, her steps steady, her head held high. Julian stared at her back, then down at the contract. He didn't know it yet, but the most important meeting of his life hadn't happened in a boardroom. It had just taken place in a booth beneath a flickering neon light, over black coffee and a side of humility. The neon buzz of the Grove Cafe had dulled to a soft hum by the time Julian Croft finally folded up the contract and stood. His coffee had long gone cold. The woman, Alara, had vanished into the back without a single glance over her shoulder. He lingered for a moment near the door, his gaze fixed on the swinging kitchen flap, a portal to a world he suddenly knew nothing about. Then, he left without another word. Sleep eluded him that night. He lay in his penthouse apartment, the sprawling city lights of downtown casting long, fractured shadows across the minimalist walls. The silence of his perfectly curated space felt oppressive. Something about Alara Vance bothered him. It wasn't just that his pride had taken a blow, though it certainly had. It was something deeper. It scraped against the hardened parts of him, the parts he thought had long since fossilized into pure, ambition-fueled machinery. He kept replaying her words, her calm precision, her unnerving composure. The way she didn't flinch when he snapped, didn't shrink when he challenged her. She wasn't playing at being smart. She was smart. By morning, Julian had already called an emergency pre-meeting with his legal team. He had them re-examine Clause 7C and the escrow triggers without revealing his source. After an hour of defensive posturing, they confirmed it. The young woman from the diner had been right on both counts. What infuriated him, and also fascinated him, was how effortlessly she'd spotted them. Flaws as top-tier, six-figure attorneys had completely missed. Later that afternoon, as he sat in a boardroom lined with glass and chrome, surrounded by people in $1,000 suits, he found his mind drifting. He wasn't seeing the PowerPoint presentation. He was seeing chipped Formica counters, smelling cheap coffee, and hearing a 19-year-old talk about billion-dollar contracts as if she were correcting a grocery list. By Wednesday, he found himself standing outside the Grove Cafe again. It was the lunch rush. The clinking of plates and the low murmur of casual conversation poured through the slightly ajar door. For a man who commanded boardrooms with unshakable confidence, he hesitated, uncertain about this entrance. When he finally stepped inside, a few heads turned. He looked wildly out of place. Alara spotted him immediately. She was carrying a tray of 3 water glasses, weaving between tables with unpracticed ease. Her hair was tied back, her apron a little looser today, her sneakers scuffed. She gave him a look, not hostile, not curious, just aware. "Back for the eggs?" she asked as he approached the counter, her tone perfectly neutral. "Back for you," he replied bluntly. A beat of silence. Then she set the tray down, leaned forward slightly, and said with no amusement, "I'm working." "I won't take long," Julian said, sliding onto a stool. "I just wanted to say thank you. You saved me from a potential disaster. Millions, at least." Alara blinked slowly, processing his sincerity. "You sure you want to be seen thanking a waitress?" The words had a slight edge, a shield she had clearly learned to carry. "That's the thing," he said, meeting her gaze. "I'm not sure you're just a waitress." She tilted her head, her arms crossed now. "What else do you think I am?" "Someone who understands systems," he began, the words coming to him as he spoke. "Someone who sees through language to the intent beneath it. Someone who, given a chance, might outthink every junior associate in my firm." Alara stared at him, her expression unblinking. "So what? You're offering me a job?" "Not exactly," he said. "I'm offering you a conversation. Off the clock. Just a chat." He glanced down at the countertop, then back up at her. "No sweets, no condescension. Just coffee. My treat, this time." She studied him for a long, silent moment, weighing the man before her. She saw the sincerity, but she also saw the world of power he represented, a world that had so far offered her nothing but obstacles. Finally, she gave a slight nod. "Come back at 10. That's when my shift ends. If you're serious, you'll wait." "I'm serious." "Then I guess we'll see," she said, and walked away. This next section creates an open loop. The audience knows a meeting will happen, but the outcome is uncertain. They are invested in seeing if Julian will show up and what Alara will decide, creating anticipation and encouraging them to keep watching. 10 o'clock came. The cafe had thinned out. The old veterans who hung around the jukebox had shuffled home, and the industrial hum of the dishwasher echoed from the back. Alara emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on a towel. Her apron was off, her hair down, framing a face that looked both young and weary. She sat across from Julian in the same booth they'd shared 2 nights ago. He was there, waiting. "You're persistent," she said. It wasn't a compliment, just a statement of fact. "I'm curious," he countered. "About what?" "How you got here," he said plainly. "How someone who thinks like you ends up, not in a courtroom, not at a desk in D.C., but here, at this counter." Alara took a deep breath, the story resting heavily in her chest. "Life doesn't follow a script, Mr. Croft. I had a plan. Pre-law at Emory, full ride, mock trial champion." She stared at her hands, her voice flat, devoid of self-pity. "Then my mom's kidneys failed. Dialysis 3 times a week. Medicaid barely covered it. My little brother, Leo, started getting into fights at school. Bills piled up. School had to wait. She finally looked up at him. There was no other choice. But I kept studying. On my own. Law journals, legal blogs, anything I could get my hands on. I even started coding a little, working on an idea for an app. Something to help people like my mom understand the papers they're asked to sign. A contract translator, interactive tools, stuff like that. But who's going to take a waitress with a half-finished degree seriously? I would, Julian said, the words coming out before he could second-guess them. Alara raised an eyebrow. You? The guy who told me to stick to pouring coffee. His jaw clenched. He deserved that. Yes, she said simply. But I'm not stupid, he added, his voice low. I've made a career out of spotting ideas before they go mainstream. I know talent when I see it. And Alara, what I saw the other night, that wasn't casual talent. That was brilliance. She looked down, her fingers tracing the chipped edge of the table. I'm not asking for charity, she said quietly. Good. I'm not offering it, he replied. I'm offering a partnership. I want to help you build your app. Resources, developers, funding. You lead. I back you. Alara didn't answer for a long while. She glanced out the window, where the streetlights spilled a lonely gold onto the wet pavement. You know what the hardest part of being invisible is? She said at last, her voice barely a whisper. It's not that people don't see you. It's that they look straight at you and still decide you're not worth seeing. Julian's voice dropped, matching her intensity. Then let's make them look again. Her eyes, deep and searching, finally met his. Okay, she said softly, but I don't want to be your project. I want to be your equal. You will be, he promised. Outside, the city buzzed with its restless energy, but inside that booth, something else buzzed louder. Possibility. They clinked 2 coffee mugs together, the sound a quiet seal on a deal that could change everything. 3 days later, Alara Vance found herself walking into a place she never imagined stepping foot in. Croft Tech headquarters, 29th floor, West Wing. Everything was too quiet, too polished. The floor gleamed like a sheet of ice, and the windows stretched so high she felt like she was standing inside a spaceship. She smoothed the collar of her thrifted navy blouse and clutched the worn leather binder that held the sketches of her app, her lifeline in this alien environment. The security guard had already asked for her ID twice. The receptionist had paused, blinked, and said, "Waitress." Alara, like it was the punchline to a joke she wasn't on. But she held her chin high. Julian was waiting just inside the boardroom, but so was someone else. A man in his late 40s, with a pressed gray suit and a jaw too tight to be friendly. Julian stood. Alara, this is Arthur Finch, our Senior VP of Legal Affairs. Arthur, this is Alara Vance. Arthur Finch extended a hand, but his gaze was cold, flicking over Alara with thinly veiled skepticism. A pleasure, he said, the words a thin veneer over his disapproval. Julian mentioned you had some intuitive insights on the Kessler merger. Alara didn't flinch at the condescending term. I had some factual observations, she corrected calmly. The air grew thick. Julian intervened. Alara is going to be leading a new project, an Access to Justice app. I'd like your team to support her with legal vetting and IP frameworks. Arthur's smile was tight. Of course. We're always happy to assist with exploratory projects. He turned to Alara. We'll have to see where you can fit into our schedule. After he left, the silence in the room was heavy. Alara looked at Julian, her expression clear. He's not going to help me. He's going to block me. Julian sighed, rubbing his jaw. He's old school. He's a gatekeeper, she corrected. And I'm not the kind of person he ever imagined walking through his gate. She took a deep breath and looked him straight in the eye. I meant what I said in the diner. I don't want this handed to me. Her voice was firm, a declaration. I want to earn it, not inherit it. Julian looked at her, a newfound respect dawning in his eyes. He saw the fighter, the strategist, the leader. He gave a single, decisive nod. The path ahead was going to be a battle, but for the first time, he felt like he had the right person fighting alongside him. The laboratory where Alara's dream began to take shape wasn't a sun-drenched, glass-walled innovation hub. It was her own small apartment, a space that smelled of her mother's Vicks Vapo Rub and the spaghetti she'd cooked for dinner. Her little brother, Leo, sat on the couch behind her, headphones on, wrestling with algebra homework. On the coffee table, a used Chromebook covered in duct tape and stickers served as her entire development lab. This was her reality, a world away from the polished mahogany of the Croft Tech boardroom. She clicked through her notes from the day, eyes scanning code snippets and layout sketches. Her brain ached, a dull throb of exhaustion and exhilaration. She was building, brick by brick, line by line. Suddenly, Leo spoke, pulling his headphones down. "You think they're really going to let you finish it?" Alara turned, her focus broken. "Finish what?" "The app," he said, gesturing to the screen. "The thing for court stuff. You think those rich guys are really going to let you do it?" His question hung in the air, heavy with the skepticism of a world that had taught him to be wary of promises. It was the same skepticism she had seen in the receptionist's eyes, in Arthur Finch's tight smile. For a moment, she was unsure what to say. Then, she looked at her brother, her voice finding a new, unshakable firmness. "I'm not waiting for permission, Leo." He looked at her, really looked at her, as if trying to understand this sudden, fierce level of boldness. Then he nodded quietly and went back to his math. That statement wasn't just for him. It was a promise she was making to herself. The next morning, she walked into the Croft Tech Innovation Lab, a space filled with developers in sneakers and hoodies who barely looked up. She held her head high, carrying not just her binder, but the quiet resolve she'd forged the night before. She didn't wait to be introduced. She walked to the main whiteboard, uncapped a marker, and began to draw. She sketched out user flows, logic paths, interface designs. She spoke about the user not as a data point, but as a person, a single mother facing eviction, a teenager confused during traffic stop, an elderly man trying to understand his medical bills. Slowly, the developers stopped what they were doing. They listened. One of them, a talented coder named Luis with kind eyes, leaned forward. "The logic paths are tight," he said, genuinely impressed. "Where'd you learn UI/UX design?" Alara shrugged, a small smile playing on her lips. "From mistakes," she said, "and from watching how people get hurt when they don't know their rights." Over the next 2 weeks, Alara became a fixture in the lab. She didn't lead like Julian, with grand proclamations and top-down directives. She led by asking questions. She let junior designers test ideas before senior ones. She listened more than she spoke. And fueled by diner leftovers and vending machine coffee, she began to build not just an app, but a team. A movement. The app, which she had started calling Clarity, began to evolve. It wasn't just Julian's project anymore. It was theirs. Then came a school pilot. It was Alara's idea to bypass the corporate gatekeepers and take the beta version directly to the people it was meant for. She and Leo printed flyers with QR codes and handed them out outside football games and bus stops in at-risk neighborhoods. On a chilly Tuesday morning, Alara stood in front of 30 high school seniors at Langston Prep, a local school where the graduation rate was a coin toss. She wore the only professional jacket she owned, a thrifted blazer, over her old diner uniform shirt. She felt a knot of nerves in her stomach, but she pushed it down. "You ever wonder what happens if a landlord keeps your security deposit?" she asked the class. A girl in the back raised her hand. "They just keep it. You can't do nothing." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. "That's what I thought too," Alara said, her voice resonating with shared experience. "Until I learned that there's a legal deadline for them to return it. And if they miss it, you can file a claim in small claims court. No lawyer needed. Just a form." The class leaned in. This wasn't a lecture from a textbook. This was real. This scene with the student is the emotional peak of this section. It's a mini-climax that raises the stakes from a conceptual project to something with life or death consequences, deeply connecting the audience to Alara's mission and making them eager to see it succeed. After the presentation, as students were packing up, one of them stayed behind. He was tall and skinny, with sad eyes and a teardrop-shaped scar on his cheek that spoke of a life harder than his years. "You really make this?" he asked, his voice low, almost a whisper. He held up his phone, showing the Clarity app's home screen. "Every word," Alara replied gently. His chest tightened. "My mom, she signed some papers last year. For a loan. She didn't understand them." He looked up at Alara, his eyes pleading. Now we're getting evicted. Next month. Alara's own chest tightened in response. This was it. This was the why. This was the human cost of a system designed to be confusing. Show me the papers, she said, her voice soft but steady. I'll walk you through it with the app. We'll see what our options are. He nodded, a flicker of hope in his tired eyes. Then he whispered the words that would echo in Alara's mind for weeks to come. No one ever talks to us like we matter. Watching him walk out, Alara felt her throat burn. She knew that feeling. Being talked over, being looked through, being invisible. Later that night, she sat on the fire escape of their apartment building, her laptop balanced on her knees, the city lights a distant, blurry sea. Julian called. You okay? He asked, his voice laced with a concern that was becoming more familiar. She told him about the student, about the pilot, about the flood of early users already engaging with the beta app, sharing their stories in the feedback section. You've started something, Alara, he said softly, a sense of awe in his voice. Do you realize that? She looked out at the city, at the endless grid of windows, each one holding a story. I don't want it to be just mine, she said. I want it to belong to every kid who ever had to sign something they didn't understand. Julian was quiet for a moment. Then he said, his voice firm with a new sense of purpose, come in tomorrow. We're going to talk about scaling this, about proper funding, and about putting your name on a masthead as the head of this entire division. Alara stared out into the night. The sirens wailed in the distance. She felt tired, down to her bones, but alive in a way she hadn't in years. Okay, she whispered, but you better be ready to build something they can't ignore. From that moment on, neither of them looked back. The quiet sabotage began almost immediately, the way it often does subtly. A postponed meeting, a delayed file transfer, passwords mysteriously expired. Arthur Finch was a master of the bureaucratic death by 1,000 cuts. He never confronted her directly, but his fingerprints were on every new obstacle. The final straw came when Alara arrived at the lab to find her access badge deactivated. The receptionist, all painted nails and practiced indifference, offered a thin smile. Sorry, you'll need to wait for clearance. An hour passed. When she was finally let in, Arthur was at the whiteboard, leading her team meeting without her. He was talking about refocusing Clarity's scope, about liability concerns, and dialing back the school outreach. When he saw her, he smiled that same thin smile. Alara, glad you could join us. We were just discussing how to protect the company. Scaling back outreach isn't protecting the company, Alara said, her voice calm but ringing with authority. It's protecting an old system, and those students are the reason this app exists. We're not dialing back. We're pushing forward. The room fell silent. She had just drawn a line in the sand. She was no longer just building an app. She was leading a rebellion. The victory against Arthur Finch's quiet sabotage was temporary. Alara knew he was a symptom, not the disease. The real battle lay ahead, in the fine print of the very deal that had brought her and Julian together. Late one night, long after the city had fallen into a restless sleep, she sat at her kitchen table, the laptop's faint blue glow illuminating the yellowed walls of her apartment. Her mother was asleep in the next room. Leo was snoring softly on the couch. The only sound was the soft tapping of her own fingers on the keyboard. She was reading the final merger agreement between Croft Tech and Kessler Solutions. Line by line, clause by clause. Something didn't sit right. The language in a schedule titled Contingency Triggers was unusually vague. One paragraph, in particular, snagged her attention. In the event of a market-based valuation event resulting in a temporary decline exceeding 7% of pre-merger market cap, Kessler retains the right to withdraw from the agreement without penalty. The word jumped out at her, blinking like a neon warning sign. Temporary. She gently nudged her brother. Leo, look at this. He groaned, pulling an earbud out. Alara, I'm failing English. You think I know what market-based valuation means? She smiled faintly. It means, she whispered, turning back to the screen, her mind racing, they can walk away from the merger if Julian's stock drops just a little, even for just a day. They could tank his value with a well-timed rumor, trigger this clause, and leave him bleeding without owing a single dime. Leo blinked. That's messed up. Yeah, Alara breathed. It is. By 6:45 a.m. the next morning, she was at Croft Tech, waiting outside the glass tower with a coffee she barely sipped. As soon as security opened the lobby, she bolted to the 29th floor. Julian wasn't in his office yet, so she went straight to the legal archives. With the help of a sleepy-eyed intern, she pulled every version of the contract, tracing the evolution of that single clause. It had been clean in earlier drafts. Then, 3 weeks ago, in a revision from Kessler's side, it had slipped in. One word: temporary. Julian walked in at 8 a.m., looking distracted. He paused when he saw her. Alara, I need 5 minutes, she said, her voice tight with urgency. She placed the printed page in front of him. This clause, Schedule F. It's a trap. He scanned it, his brow furrowing. I've seen this. Arthur's team reviewed it. They skimmed it, she shot back. Or worse, they missed it. Look closer, Julian. If your stock dips for even 1 day, Kessler can void the deal, no penalty. And right now, with the merger announcement pending, you're completely exposed. They're waiting for you to announce the deal, let the market bump, then leak a fake story to drop the stock. They walk away clean, and your company is crippled. Julian's expression shifted through a rapid, terrifying sequence. Disbelief, then concern, then a slow, simmering anger that made the air in the room feel thin. Why the hell would Arthur's team miss this? Because, Alara replied, her voice flat with a truth that landed like a punch. He was too busy trying to sabotage my access to this building. Julian turned and walked to the floor-to-ceiling window, gripping the bridge of his nose. The city sprawled beneath him, his empire suddenly looking fragile. He turned back to her, his eyes clear and decisive. This, he said with conviction, this is why you're here. You saw what no one else could, or what no one else would. He didn't hesitate. He picked up his office phone. Call an emergency board session. Today, I want legal, PR, and M&A in a conference room by 10. We're rewriting this deal. Later that morning, Alara sat silently at the end of the long, polished table in the executive boardroom. There was no nameplate at her seat, but everyone there knew exactly who she was. Arthur Finch entered last, his face a tight mask. He refused to look at her. Julian opened the meeting without preamble. We are pulling Clause F from the Kessler Agreement. We are redrafting the language. Alara Vance, he said, his voice ringing with authority, identified a loophole that could have sunk this company. She is the reason we are still in control of this deal. A stunned silence filled the room. Arthur finally spoke, his voice strained. With all due respect, we vetted that clause thoroughly. No, you glossed it, Julian said, his tone like ice. She caught what you didn't. From now on, all major documentation passes through Alara's desk first. A few executives exchanged glances. One board member, a woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and silver hair, named Eleanor Sterling, leaned forward. Ms. Vance, she said, her voice cutting through the tension. How did you learn to spot something like that? Alara met her gaze calmly. I've been taught to read the fine print my whole life, she said, her voice even and clear. Because people like me aren't given second chances. We have to get it right the first time. Eleanor Sterling held her gaze for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Good answer. The following section creates a false defeat. Just when Alara seems to have won, a new, more insidious threat emerges from the investors. This low point makes her subsequent triumph far more impactful. The fallout was immediate. Alara's name, once a whisper in the hallways, was now a headline on tech gossip sites. Waitress turned legal prodigy. Croft Tech's bold new bet. The praise was intoxicating, but the backlash was venomous. Her inbox exploded. Then came the email from Investor Relations. Subject: urgent concerns raised by Tier 1 investors. Several major stakeholders had voiced discomfort with her central role. They requested clarification on her credentials. That evening, in a closed-door meeting, the issue was laid bare. We're not questioning her intelligence, said a man in a pinstripe suit, but it's unprecedented. No degree, no traditional resume. She's the face of our most visible launch in years. Your real concern, Alara said, her voice quiet but firm, is that I didn't come from your world. And yet here I am. Julian had been silent for most of the meeting, listening. Now he stood. His voice cut through the tension like a blade. I hired Alara because she saved this company from a billion-dollar sinkhole. She has led a product that, before she touched it, was just a half-baked concept on a pitch deck. He looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every single person. And if this board forces me to choose between her and placating a few donors who are afraid of change, I will choose her. Every single time. The silence that followed was absolute. The day of the launch, the auditorium was packed. Reporters, developers, investors, skeptics. Crofttech's PR team had presented Alara with a polished, sterile, safe script for her announcement. She read it once, then placed it gently on the table. No, she said, we just want to make sure nothing is controversial, an executive pleaded. Justice is always controversial, she replied. She wrote her own speech that night, not for approval, for truth. When Julian introduced her, she walked out alone. No music, no fanfare, just her and a microphone. Good morning, she began, her voice steady and clear, reaching every corner of the vast room. My name is Alara Vance. I was raised 6 blocks from here. I've waited tables, changed bandages for my mother, and helped my brother stay in school. And now, I've helped build something. She paused, letting the weight of her next words settle. It doesn't belong to a boardroom. It belongs to everyone who's ever signed something they didn't understand and paid the price for it. Clarity isn't just an app, she continued, her voice gaining power. It's a flashlight in a room that most people don't even know they're locked in. The room held its breath. This isn't about me. I don't need your applause. I need you to listen to what happens when people get the tools they were never meant to touch and use them to stand a little taller. She looked out into the crowd, her gaze sweeping over the powerful and the hopeful alike. She finished simply. Justice shouldn't be reserved for the fluent. It belongs to all of us. Today, we begin proving that. When she stepped off the stage, the silence broke. It wasn't just applause. It was a roar, a standing ovation. It was the sound of a paradigm shifting. It's in moments like these we realize one voice, speaking one truth, can change everything. If this story resonates with you, consider sharing it with someone who might need to hear it. Because sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is let someone know they're not alone. 2 hours after the launch, the cheers had faded and the cameras were gone. Alara sat alone in a side conference room, her heartbeat still not quite back to normal. A knock on the door broke her silence. It was Luis, the developer, holding a tablet, his hand trembling slightly. You should see this, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. We're trending. He turned the screen toward her. On the homepage of a major tech news outlet, a photo of Alara at the podium stared back. The headline read, "The future of law is here." She wears sneakers and speaks truth. The embedded video of her speech already had over 1 million views. She handed the tablet back. The noise was overwhelming. She pulled out her own phone. Over 100 texts. One from Julian read simply, "Board is asking for a meeting. Today. You ready?" She typed back one word, always. Back in a boardroom, the atmosphere was entirely different. They were all waiting for her. Julian nodded her toward the head of the table. "This seat's yours." Eleanor Sterling, the silver-haired board member, cleared her throat. "Ms. Vance, the response has been overwhelming. Investors are calling. Community leaders. Even a mayor's office." She paused. There's concern. The platform's reach is growing so rapidly. Some feel it might be prudent to bring in external leadership, someone with policy experience, to co-lead with you. Alara let the words hang in the air. "I appreciate the concern," she replied, her voice calm. "But I built Clarity because I live the gap it's trying to close. And with all due respect, I won't be managed into silence by a co-leader with no skin in this fight. This app needs to be led by someone grounded in the lives it touches." Eleanor looked at her, then at Julian, who simply gave a subtle nod of support. "Very well," Eleanor said. "We will follow your lead. But be prepared." Alara was already prepared. That evening, walking through the corridors of Crofttech, she noticed something strange. People were smiling at her, not politely, but warmly. They finally saw her. In a lab, the team was gathered around a monitor, buzzing with excitement. A breaking news banner was displayed on the screen. President's office reaches out to Clarity for potential collaboration on National Digital Literacy Plan. The room erupted, but Alara wasn't smiling. She felt a different kind of pull. She stepped outside into a quiet alley, the cool wind a welcome touch on her face. She dialed a number she hadn't used in months. The voice that answered was cautious. "Hello, Professor Albright," Alara said. "It's Alara Vance. Remember me?" A pause, then the voice warmed instantly. "Of course I remember. Alara, I saw your speech. It was remarkable." Professor Albright had been her pre-law mentor at Emory, the woman who once told her she had the sharpest mind in the freshman class, right before Alara had dropped out without saying goodbye. "I didn't finish what I started," Alara said, the words heavy with long-held regret. "You just finished something much bigger," Albright replied. "I want to come back," Alara said quietly. "Not because I need the degree to prove anything, but because I want the education. For myself. On my terms." Albright was silent for a moment. "Your seat is still here, Alara." "It always was." Hanging up, Alara looked up at the sky. Gray clouds loomed, but a brilliant strip of gold light broke through the edges. It was nearly a year to the day since she had first slid that thick contract across the counter. Now, she stood on a makeshift stage in a community center, staring out at a room packed with kids, parents, teachers, and elders. A banner behind her read, "Clarity, free legal education for everyone." "I started Clarity because I watched my own mother sign away things she didn't understand," she told the crowd. "I watched my neighbors get trapped because no one told them they had the right to ask questions. So I started asking." Afterward, people lined up to speak with her, to hug her, to thank her. She stayed until every last question was answered. When she finally stepped out the back door, breathing in the thick evening air, Julian was waiting by a car. He grinned. "You know, you just made 3 local politicians cry in there." "They'll be okay," she said, smiling. "There's something else," he said, pulling an envelope from his jacket. "Open it." Inside was a short, handwritten letter. "Dear Ms. Vance, we are proud to inform you that your re-enrollment at Emory University has been approved with a full scholarship. We have also renamed the Law and Social Change Fellowship in your honor. You are not just returning, you are building a legacy." Alara stared at the paper, unmoving. She blinked rapidly, pressing the letter to her chest. "You did this." "No," Julian said softly. "You did this. I just made a few phone calls to make sure the world kept up." That fall, she attended her first class. No cameras, no press. Just her spiral notebook and the same stubborn hunger she'd always had. One night, just before Christmas, she returned to the Grove Cafe. The tiles were still chipped, the neon light still flickered. She sat in the same booth. Julian joined her, setting down 2 mugs of hot, black coffee. "Ever think it would come to this?" he asked. She looked around the familiar, comforting space. "I didn't think it would go anywhere." He nodded. "Funny thing is, neither did I." They sat in a comfortable silence. Then, from behind the counter, a new waitress approached. She was young, nervous, her hair in a puff. She recognized Alara instantly, fumbling with her notepad. Sorry," the girl stammered. You're her, right? The Clarity app lady." Alara grinned. "I am." The girl's face broke into a radiant smile. "My aunt used your app. She got her job back after she was wrongfully fired. She said to tell you thank you." Alara reached out, her hand gently covering the girl's. "Tell her she did it herself," she said, her voice soft but sure. "I just handed her the flashlight." As the girl walked away, beaming, Julian lifted his mug. "To the ones who never get a second look." Alara lifted hers, too, the warmth seeping into her hands. "And to the ones who make them look again." They clinked their mugs, the quiet sound lost in the gentle hum of the cafe. No press, no headlines. Just 2 people who had built something that would outlast them both. Outside, the city lights blinked on, quiet and steady. Just like the change they had started, one word, one person, one act of courage at a time.